Hello, my extraordinary X-Men fans. It's Jerry Rasco with you, and we are today going to take some time together and look at X-Men number 3. This is another classic in the beginning of the X-Men lore. We're introduced to another new character, which is always super fun, and yeah, I'm very interested in going through this early Marvel Silver Age comic with you today. Of course, I want to thank all the subscribers to the channel. We're growing, and that's all because of you. So thank you all so much for that. I appreciate it. I do also want to point out that and remind folks that when you are a subscriber and we reach 1,000 people, 1,000 subscribers, we're going to be giving away some artwork. So we've got a original X-Men piece with the original team here in their school uniforms. So there's one. We also have a amazing Spider-Man piece to celebrate the series I do with Amazing Spider-Man comics. And then as well, we have the Incredible Hulk. This piece is also going to somebody. Again, one lucky subscriber, no cost, no purchase necessary. All you have to do is click that subscriber button, help us get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you can immediately be registered to just win one of these pieces of artwork completely for free. So please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. That said, I'm very interested in getting into this issue with you, so let's jump over and take a look. Okay, we have the cover to X-Men number 3. This is another Jack Kirby creation here. So we have the team fighting the Blob. So we have the first appearance of the Blob. Now, in today's world, the Blob as a character, probably not the most dangerous villain that we think of. Not somebody that you list as a major threat to the X-Men, but that's not how he's introduced here. So, pretty interesting. The kind of seriousness that they bring. Obviously, this again is a computer colored version of this cover. This is not exactly what the original cover looked like. The art is the same, but the coloring is different. So I do want to note that. Composition is good. You've got the team in battle, which is always great. This does bring us into one of the things that is a little bit different in this series than the Spider-Man series that we've looked at or the Hulk series that we looked at. Again, if you follow along the channel, you'd be familiar with those. And that is, this is the first team book. And when you have an individual character, it's very easy to just have Spider-Man, like the last issue I just recorded prior to this was Spider-Man versus Mysterio. 2 figures on a cover. You can make them very large. You can do interesting things with the composition in terms of different shapes you can use, ways to move the eye through the page. Well, here we have 6 figures. So it's hard to give everybody enough space. And then as well, as you can see with this is more indicative of Silver Age comics and modern comics. All of this cover, the logos, the words, all the blurbs, beware the Blob, the X-Men, all that kind of stuff. You take that away, and there's a lot more real estate to work with. But unfortunately, this is very common practice, again, with these Silver Age comics. So it's good considering the amount of space that's available. Iceman is kind of left out here, and that's pretty common in these early issues, only because I think it's sort of a, how do you show a guy who can make ice factor into a battle without him just freezing the guy solid every time, right? You got to come up with unique things, and that's obviously a little bit of a challenge here. It is interesting to point out, we obviously think of the X-Men as arguably the most successful line of comics in Marvel Comics history. Certainly features the highest selling single issue in Marvel Comics history is the X-Men. However, at this point in time, the X-Men were not particularly popular. And so just remember, we're very early on, as is most of the time the case with early Marvel Comics. They're sort of working things out and figuring it out as they go. So, anyway, that's the cover. It certainly fits with what we're trying to do here. It shows the Blob as sort of an unstoppable force. There's certainly ways we could be more dynamic with the cover, but overall, it's solid for what we're looking to do. As I always mention in these videos, this is a scanned PDF copy. So otherwise, the cover, as I mentioned, was computer recolored, but here it is not. The interiors are exactly the way they were. So we see all of the old ads, we see the printing, we see the, any mistakes, anything like that. Overall, it's a pretty clean copy for something that goes all the way back to the early 60s. In fact, this is 1964. So pretty old stuff, even as of 2005 when they scan these. But that's what we're looking at, which I always really enjoy. The art team is the same that we've seen so far in our first couple of issues. We have Stan Lee writing, as he's at this point, I think he's writing everything. We have Jack Kirby as the penciler, and then Paul Reinman as the inker. And again, just 3 issues in, starting to dial stuff in a little bit. One of the things that we're going to see here, you see a little bit at this beginning, is Iceman is starting to get a face. So in the first couple issues, his snowman form doesn't really have a face. But we're starting in this, we're going to see some facial features. Definitely really leaning into the yellow and blue of the costume. So it's a lot more like a dark navy blue. So it's blue with darker shadows as opposed to black with blue highlights. I think that's really where we've landed at this point. Sorry, the splash page is good. This is very common for these early X-Men issues. It seems like every issue starts with training. The team is training. Now, why would you do that? One, at this point in time, there are no comic book stores, or there are very few comic book stores. Most of your comics are resold through other merchants like gas stations, liquor stores, pharmacies, grocery stores, convenience stores, whatever, department stores. So once these are out of print, once they go to sale and they don't sell, issues don't sell, the merchants who are supposed to be selling them rip off the cover, send the cover back to Marvel and say, hey, this is how many I couldn't sell. I need a credit for these on my next order. And that's how they would do it. It wasn't until we had what's called the direct market where we started, publishers started selling directly to, I guess, distributors started selling directly to comic book stores, where if things didn't get sold, there was a back issue. And then that issue would be just kept because the store had already paid for it, and they would put it in a box and try to wait until somebody was like, hey, I'm missing this one issue for my collection. I need to pick that up. So my point is, you could have missed X-Men 1, X-Men 2, again, down the line. You could have missed X-Men 5, 6, 7, whatever. So it's important to sort of reintroduce the reader to the characters in a way that fits the story, but also, shows off. What can they do? What are their personalities like? How do they interact with each other? All those things are important. The other thing is, it really emphasizes that these are still teenagers. Now, they may be, I think we mentioned with issue number 1, I think they mentioned the fact that Bobby is the youngest, Iceman is the youngest, he's 16, so the others are like 18. So yes, they're kind of at the end of their school age or teenage years, but they're still in a school. So we're emphasizing youth, we're emphasizing school, we're emphasizing practices. These are things that readers could understand. Maybe, if you're a kid on your school basketball team or your school baseball team, you understand, hey, I got to go to practice and hone my skills. And here's a bunch of kids that are doing the same thing, just with superhero skills. So as opposed to like a Superman that sort of feels like he came out of the womb, complete and had all his powers and everything by the time we saw it. Or a Batman that's already he's got all his training. He's fully developed character. Here we have these characters that are really still learning not only how to use their powers, but how to be heroes as well. I will say there is this one issue one problem, and that is Cyclops. He is drawn without his visor. Whoops. Clearly, this is him. He's blasting these things, and from the side, we should have had a little bit of a visor here, but we do not. So that's it's colored yellow. That part's right, but it should stick out a little bit further. So we've got a little bit of an error there. That's not also uncommon in some of these early issues. We cut over here. This is the so continuing to train and typical showing off of powers through goofing off. Iceman and Beast, it seems like whenever there's a dull moment, Beast starts fooling around and causing problems. So Beast is talking, and this is where we first see him starting to become an intellectual. So they mention he's a muscle-bound bookworm. He abhors violence, things like that. Whereas in the beginning, we saw the Beast was more of a... he spoke more roughly. He was less polished that way. So obviously now we've switched that and say, hey, no, this guy's an intellectual. This is the other thing. It's issue 3. In issue 1, when we're introduced to characters, Scott Summers is not Scott. He is Slim. And I did go through both issue 1 and 2, and at no point is his name Scott ever mentioned. So this is the first time he's ever called Scott as his actual name. And, we see him bemoaning the fact that he has these powers, that they're dangerous, and he, has issues with possibly controlling those powers. And so that's kind of the first hint we see of that, but that really leads into the development of his character and his sort of personality over time. Let's see here. So again, more training. One of the things I want to say here as I was starting to look through this, and it just struck me very quickly, and this is kind of an unpopular opinion. Again, you may disagree. If you have disagreements, please feel free to voice them in the comments. Keep it civil. This is just my opinion, and everybody else has one. And your opinion can certainly differ, and that's not a problem. But my concern here, or no, my thought is, my unpopular opinion is, this early Jack Kirby art is very flat at this stage of his career. When I look at Cyclops, he doesn't feel like a 3D form. He feels like a rendered form that's drawn flat, and the shading just sort of is applied on top of this flat form instead of the shading defining the shape of the form. So especially things like, it's very obviously, it's kind of a weird thing, but we have this training session with Jean, and when you look at her and this image of her over here, and she's levitating this block through these shapes, it just feels very flat. Everything feels very flat to me. There's very little dimensionality. I don't feel the space they're in. I don't feel like the forms, like when I look at Cyclops' form, it just struck me very clearly like this feels very flat. So for me, as a young kid, it's one of the things that kind of turned me off to Jack Kirby's art. As I have learned over the years I appreciate more. We'll see as this develops. He develops a shorthand, styles and symbols that are lines and shadows that represent things, and it was a way for him to not only draw but draw fast. But like, here's an example too. Xavier is looking, so he gets a sense that there's another mutant out there, and he goes, sends his mind out to search and scan for it. And look at this woman who's waiting, on the city, and there's a bus, just so flat because there's no shading. There's nothing. There's no shading under, and this happens a lot. Like, there's no shading under the noses. There's no shading under the lips of the faces. They just sometimes feel like features just sort of pasted on a surface. The Beast here is a little bit better because he's turned slightly 3/4, so we can see the outline of his face. There's more rendering and shaping around where his cheek would be and his nose through those shadows. That's a much better face. But when you get sometimes like this Xavier face, again, just sort of feels like it's just lines pasted on a flesh-colored egg, as opposed to wrapping around a three-dimensional face. This is, again, just my opinion. It doesn't take away from, obviously, the credit of Jack Kirby, the genius of Jack Kirby, or the groundbreaking work that he did. Just my unpopular opinion of why he's not my personal favorite artist of all time. And his is early. His art absolutely changes. When we will eventually be looking at some of his work later into the 70s, and it's a totally different thing. It's definitely a whole nother deal. Interesting. So as Xavier is scanning stuff and looking for a mutant, one of the things I point out here is there's no Cerebro yet. So if you're familiar with X-Men lore, Cerebro is a computer that he uses to enhance his telepathic abilities to scan for mutants and can find other mutants to potentially recruit them to the school. That's the idea, right? And here we do not have that. He's just scanning himself. The team is going to go and try to find him. And this artwork I found kind of reminded me, I mentioned there's kind of two older styles. So it's supposed to be kind of like this gag of fighting over the girl, and everybody's fighting over the girl, right? This reminds me, it could be out of like Archie Comics or Little Abner, especially like when you see this, the two figures, the bigger one, the smaller one, they're both trying to rush to get there first. You have this motion of them zipping around Cyclops, who's sort of slow and mopey, and their feet are off the ground, and there's sort of these cartoon shoes, the soles. I'm surprised there's not a little swirl, a little hole in the bottom, because they've jammed themselves in the door frame. Like, it's very cartoony, in a way that is different than what we expect from Marvel Comics and superhero comics. So yeah, that's what it reminded me of, and I'm again just kind of like let's get past that. Here's another example of where I was saying like sort of flat. The face on Jean there is very flat. Interesting from a story perspective, we learn that Scott does care for Jean. He says he would give her his heart, but he doesn't want to because he's worried about his powers. And here we also find that Xavier is in love with Jean, and but he is their teacher and in the wheelchair, so he can't act on that either. Interesting stuff. There's been a lot of fan theories over the years that's everybody falls in love with Jean Grey, and the question is it real? How much of it is maybe her latent telepathic powers sort of influencing people? There's a lot of fan theories out there that are kind of interesting. This is very nice. So Beast sees what he thinks is a guy floating in the air. He walks up the building. We don't really see the Beast doing this anymore, where his fingers or his toes are so strong that he can walk vertically up a wall. But that's a cool power and a cool use of his abilities. And this is a really nice perspective shot looking down the building, because what's important when you want to do that, you've established the ground. A couple little cars, little dots here could be people or objects on the street. That's perfect. If you just do the building in the bottom of the building and don't show objects on the ground, it actually doesn't look like the ground. It looks like could be the sky, and now is he going up or down? And so this is a very good perspective piece. Again, the only thing that I'd really like maybe are some shadows. There's building. Where's the light coming from? Is it up above, the sun shining down? Great. Well, there should be shadows underneath some of this stuff. And we kind of miss that a little bit. Turns out he's not the mutant. Here's another guy at a carnival. He's also not the mutant. This is a scam. And then we find the Blob, who is doing his demonstration. And yes, this is the mutant. So the Blob, you would argue, looks like just a large, overweight man. But we quickly find out that he's more than that. And he's certainly not nearly as large as he is drawn today. The Blob gets bigger and bigger as he goes. But at this point, he's big. And Nobody can move him. Once he establishes his position and he's touching the ground, he cannot be moved. And I do like this piece here, this panel of the people trying to strain to move him. I thought this one was really good. This facial expression and the trying to lift the arm, and then this guy pushing from the right and his feet, the way his legs are. You see the strain and the tension. So I thought that was really, really nice there. And the Blob is just standing there. Now they show how his skin can't be pierced. He has a guy shoot him, and the bullets sort of absorb into his body, his bulk, and then he can just sort of flex and boop, the bullets all pop out. I do have two issues with this. Real quick. So actually here, let me show you again, let's look at the image here. So you see how the images of the gun pointed right at us and theoretically shooting the gun, right? That is not how you shoot a gun. Now remember, the guy came out, he's supposed to be a cowboy and he has a rifle. That is not how you hold a rifle. So if he's right-handed, it would be against his right shoulder, and you lean your head in. So his left hand is supporting the barrel, his right hand is pulling the trigger. And then typically, so for me, I'm left-handed. I would be squinting my outside eye so that my right eye, my correct eye, is looking down like this, down the barrel. He has his other. Now, you could have both eyes open. Some people shoot with both eyes. But his right eye is obscured by the gun. He's literally holding it to his face and looking like this, and if he shot this, it's going to hit him in the face. So that is not how you hold a gun. It's to the side. I see this all the time in comics. People don't understand that, and they don't know. It's always awkward. It's to the side, and you kind of lean into it more than you realize. Then the last thing I'll talk about here is the bullets. Again, it's a small thing. It's not a big deal, but this is not actually what bullets look like. If you're not familiar, a bullet, when it comes out of a gun, is just a little blob. It's a little blob, no pun intended. It's a little piece of lead, depending on the size and the caliber of the gun you're firing and all that kind of stuff. It has, it can be pointed, it can be wrapped in other metals, but typically it's just a little piece of lead that goes flying. What you're seeing embedded in his skin is actually considered, when they say he stopped the shells. Bullets go in a shell or a casing. There's gunpowder inside. That little circle at the back is what's called a primer. There's a pin in a gun that hits that. It explodes. It explodes the rest of the powder in the case or shell. And then the bullet piece is projected forward. It's usually made of brass. That brass piece that the bullet is lodged into and where all the gunpowder is, that does not come out of the gun. That is ejected out of the gun. And so you wouldn't see that embedded in the Blob's skin. It would just be little bits of metal that he then flexes out. So it's a small thing, but if you know, it's anything, if you know something, if you're really into, let's say, cars, and you draw a car and you're like, that's not right. That's not how that works. It's an engine. That's not how an engine's put together or whatever. Or it always bothers me in TV and movies when they have computer hackers, and they kind of go, let me see. Okay, I'm in. And you're like, you just hit a bunch of random keys. Like, that's not how that works. And this is, again, an example of that. Here. So that is an example of that. These here are not bullets. These are the brass casings or shells that the bullet goes into. Now, this actually could be the little bullets popping out. That's fine. Scott goes to talk to him, and the Blob is sort of a jerk, right? So he doesn't want anything to do with the X-Men or whatever. He's very arrogant until he sees Jean, and of course he's like, hey, which is natural. And of course Scott's like, here, I'll show you what's up, and knocks him down. This face in this panel 4 is weird. I don't know what it is about it that makes me go, something's not right. These other faces from a distance aren't too bad. This one here where he's kind of smiling at Jean with his double chins and the scar is pretty good. There's something about this one that's just weird, and I just can't place it. I think the eyes are maybe a little far apart. Yeah, for having such a small nose. There's just something about it that's off. That I couldn't put my finger on. Here we got a couple pages. He does finally decide to go back to him again, thanks probably to Gene, and now they want to see what his powers are. So you can see you can't use a winch to pull him off the ground. Once he's touching the ground with his, now in this case, his bare feet. Later that changes. It doesn't matter. He wears boots later, and same thing. He can't be moved. But here it looks like it's got to be his skin touching the ground, and the chains just break. He can't be burned. He can't be shot. So plenty of stuff. They go to freeze him. Iceman's trying to show off. He freezes his foot solid, and he just kind of wiggles his foot and shatters the ice. So he's strong. Angel goes to punch him because he's like, hey, I'm out of here. They offer him a spot on the X-Men. He's like, nope, I don't need any of you losers. And so now they're like, uh-oh, he knows our secret. He knows our location. He knows our identities. We got to wipe his mind. And he's like, no, you don't. I'm out. And he's trying to escape, and the X-Men are trying to stop him. And then here's your example of where, we came back to Cyclops being like, I'm concerned about the danger of my powers. He wants to blast the Blob, but the Blob has grabbed Angel and is using him as a shield. So Cyclops can't blast him. We get, but again, sort of showing off the Blob's powers. We get this sort of ruckus, which is good. And this is something that Jack Kirby is really good at when you have a lot of characters in chaos and insanity, right? So Angel's pushed into Cyclops. Both figures are falling back. Jean's running forward. Iceman's throwing snow. We'll call it ice, but it looks like snow. So things are all sort of all over the place and crazy. And that's something that Jack Kirby really was very accomplished at. They lock him in. However, Beast goes to attack and knocks him through the door. I like the smile on the face of the Blob here as he's being struck full force with the Beast, because he knows it's not going to hurt him. It's just knocking him out the door, which is exactly where he wants to go. So I like that little smile. I think that's some cute cartooning there. Nice, again, storytelling there. This panel is weird. I'm assuming, and this is part of the problem. When you put your figure like this, the Beast, and his hands are on the bottom panel, I have to assume that he's using his hands to push off, to sort of leapfrog. So he's leapt, his hands are hitting, and then he's propelling himself forward even more into the Blob. But that does not make sense or work from a perspective angle. What I mean is, if the Blob is standing on this floor and the floor comes at us, then the floor is going to be lower than the panel border. And if the Beast needs to touch the floor, his hands would be down here towards where it says trademark, not up here. So that's just a mistake in the perspective or in the position of the Beast. You can't have somebody that's closer to you in perspective higher on the page unless they're standing on something like a building, a ledge, a roof, a box, or something. Just if we're all on the same plane, which is this floor, anything closer to us, like Jean over here in this panel, will be lower because the horizon stretches up away from us as we go away. That's just the laws of perspective. So this seems weird. Now, he could just be in the air, but this is the problem. When you put his hands on that border, it feels like he's touching it. And so that's a big no-no. Blob takes off, escapes, and the team's like, okay, what the heck are we going to do here? And interesting, they're like, I never thought anybody would turn us down. And you start to be like, who else? Jean was invited as a scholarship. Her parents don't really know what's going on. And then, we didn't see how the other team got here. Was it one by invitation? And so far, everybody said yes, and this is the first guy that said no. We don't have any history to see that, so it doesn't really mean much. But now he's got to, again, they're like, we've got to erase his memory. Great animals on this page. It's not always the case with the comic. Great elephant and the horse in the back is good. Both can sometimes be a little tricky to draw. Horses maybe more than others because there's some very unique way that their legs and move and the structure. So it's a nice horse. And again, elephant is really, really good. I'm very impressed with that. And then you have some cool, sideshow circus folk there. It's very colorful and great. This blob face, again, very different. He seems to differentiate almost between panel to panel. So what I mean by that is, like, we see this one here, which I mentioned, he's kind of smiley. Here, he just has kind of a short haircut, and he's a guy kind of heavy set, overweight guy. Then, again, kind of just a chubby face, but not too weird. And then when he escapes here, now it looks like his face is sort of melting almost. There's too many wrinkles. If he's supposed to be fat, that fat fills in those wrinkles. So he shouldn't have quite as many creases and wrinkles. Typically, you're going to get under your chin, around maybe the eyes, right? The eyes are going to be kind of sunken in because your cheeks are going to be heavier. So overall, too many lines on the face for somebody that's supposed to be bloated and fat, right? Angel finds him and realizes, hey, they're coming for us. Xavier is working on a device that will amplify his power so that he can erase everybody's mind all at once. Here again, we've emphasized the beast is an intellectual. He's reading advanced calculus book and taking notes, holding the book with his foot, papers all over. So again, we've really trying to emphasize that he's much smarter, and that's brand new to this issue. Now we have this, not a good giraffe. It's very weird. It looks like a head on a stick. Again, we have to remember, in today's world, you could go to Google and search giraffe eating, giraffe drinking, and you could get a good reference picture for this and figure it out and draw it, and it would feel very real. Back then, what did they have? National Geographic magazine, maybe, if you're lucky, or a zoo catalog or a zoo pamphlet or something. So it'd be a lot harder to find reference for a giraffe. So I'm sure they're doing the best they can, but just considering that we just saw this great elephant piece, image, which is terrific, and the horse is really good, the giraffe kind of missing a little bit. And here we go. They're going to raid the house, and somehow the blob has lost his hair. Zoom in on that. Yeah, so almost looks like it was supposed to be colored, but he has no hair. It was not drawn. Inking mistake? Maybe. And again, this is also, when I say I'm not super happy with some of the shading of Jack Kirby, I'm listing it as Jack because Jack was the penciler. It could be an inking issue too. That could be Paul Reinman deciding, hey, Jack gave me all these great shadows and stuff, but I don't want to fill those in. I don't have time. I'm going to move fast. Maybe that's it. But there should be a lot more shadows on the blob. Each of these folds of his body, if he has that are overlapping other parts of his body, should have a shadow on them. Especially when you see there's shadows on the legs here. There's just this little scratch. I'm never a big fan of this. This little on the ground. It's sort of I don't know. If I can have a shadow this heavy on his leg, we should have some shadows on the ground too. And there's ways to do it where it doesn't get all muddy, but we're just avoiding it. Great energy and movement of these guys rushing in as Jean opens the door so they don't actually hit anything. So you feel that speed and that energy just from their body position, the bending, the weight moving forward, all that kind of stuff. And then great gag of Cyclops waiting there, blasts him and knocks him right back out the door. Again, cartoony, but a good gag. Now we've got some trapeze artists that are going to swing over. And who do they meet but the Beast? And I like this. We don't actually see the Beast. We just see that foot on the rope in the foreground. That's nice framing of this piece, and then the shaking. So you got the lines showing the shaking, and their body language shows that the rope is shaking. That's terrific. So that part's really, really good there. Let's see here. Nice energy, framing of the footwork, shaking effect. Yep, got it. All right, I'm back caught up on my notes here. And I think it's really funny that these people who are theoretically, right, they're highly trained professional acrobats in a circus are just completely upstaged instantly by this kid who has skills they could never hope for because of his mutation, right? So great stuff there. He immediately gets away, no problem. Now we're talking again, another animal. This is an incredibly bad gorilla. This does not look like a gorilla. It looks like Sasquatch. I don't understand why we don't know what gorillas look like at this point. Again, I get it. The reference isn't there the way we have reference today, but I'll argue there was the Bronx Zoo, and Jack Kirby lived in New York. He could have gone to the zoo and looked at a gorilla, but honestly, I'm sure he didn't have time. This guy was drawing every day, all day, to support his family, and he just wouldn't have time for the zoo. Eventually here we see that the numbers game is sort of catching up. So at first it's no problem. Angel escapes, the cowboy, but then the human cannonball guys jump him. The other X-Men come. Cyclops takes care of the elephant. I like this. Again, nice use of the elephant, and then the way he pushes him back with his blast and digging in through the ground. That's always great. But as we've learned so far in the first couple issues, when he has to use like all his power or like maximum power, it kind of knocks him out for a minute. He's not that strong yet. And so that's what happens. And now, again, things kind of pile up. We've got guys that are all decked out in warm clothes so that they can actually take on Iceman. Jean can't fight off everybody else. They're all surrounding her. And Xavier's still got to work on his machine. This is very nice where he's looking out the window. This is a great Dutch angle. I've talked about this in my other series as well. If you haven't seen those, a Dutch angle, normally everything in your world is perpendicular. And what that means is your ground is relatively flat and buildings and things come up, and this is perpendicular. Straight up, down, 90 degrees. Buildings don't, except for the Leaning Tower of Pisa, buildings typically aren't built like this on an angle. So Xavier's house, his mansion, his school is not on an angle, but we tilt the image to give it energy, to give it drama. He's looking out the window. It's dun, dun, dun. And then he comes back to this machine. So that's a nice use of the Dutch angle there on that image of Xavier at the window. Again, more chaos. This is, in my opinion, where this early Jack Kirby work really shines, is when you've got stuff going on all over through the page. These guys are holding Jean, but she can only attack one guy at a time, and so this guy's spinning in the air. That's terrific. These other guys have got Iceman. I like how one guy's got his foot. They're yelling to each other, and then, all right, we got it. Well, Cyclops breaks out, and this is nice. This is a really good panel. I like it's subtle, but I like the breaking of this net is very, very good. I think it's terrific. And then, knowing he already knows what the Blob's powers are, he's not going to try the same thing twice. So he tries knocking him off his feet by essentially blasting the ground out from under him. Can't move the Blob off the ground, but you can move the ground. Well, now again, the numbers game is really caught up. Cyclops gets grabbed, and now there's a bag over his head. He can't see, so he can't risk shooting his blast. Great swing here by Beast, throwing the gorilla off to the side. That's great energy. That is exactly the kind of body language and style that Jack Kirby helped define in regards to comic books and action. Don't show him just sort of going like this. You show him going like this all the way across, and you know how much more energy and motion was involved. So if you're going to go, you go big, and that's terrific. Finally, it takes the Blob. He gets a hold of the Beast, and once he's got him, muscles him down. They tie him up with big ropes. Iceman, of all the things, I don't know why, but they felt like we needed to emphasize that if Iceman, the rest of them are tied up, but Iceman has a circle of fire, and if it falls, it'll fall around him and melt him. But at this point, he's not made of solid ice. It's just a coating, so it would melt the ice off the outside of him, but I don't know that it would hurt him. So it seems a little bit of a empty threat, but whatever. So here comes the rest of the crew. And so Xavier reaches out to Marvel Girl because she is not helpless. Obviously, once you can move things with your mind, it doesn't matter if you're blindfolded or not. So she unties herself, gets a knife, and uses a knife to cut their bonds and free everybody. I don't know why she couldn't just use her mental powers to untie them, why they needed the knife, but that's fine. Again, just real quick, the pacing. So I've talked about this in other comics. One of the things that's really important, it's not just... So the many panels on a page like this, I mean, 6-8 panels on a page, 6, 2, 4, 6. Like, this is important. It's not just originally it's kind of a throwback to your comic strips, where comic strips are sort of panel, panel, panel. And very early comics were just reprints of comic strips stacked on top of each other in a bigger format. So you could have a strip, 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 and that would tell you the story. So that would be like 3 days worth of, 3 panels, 3 panels, 3 panels. So you saw a lot of this, what we call the 9-panel grid in early comic books. Obviously, we're not quite into that range. We're seeing some variation on the composition, the number of panels, the layout. That's all great, but there's still a lot of panels. And the reason you want to use a lot of small panels together like this, as opposed to just big splashes, which I like. I'm always a big fan. I say it all the time in my Spidey series. Big action needs big panels. I think it benefits because you have so much more detail and real estate as an artist to draw the details you want, the shading, the rendering, the action. You don't have to scrunch things into little tiny figures that are, an inch tall. But this has pacing. Every comic book panel is a moment in time. And if you show lots of panels with sequential actions, that shows you it's happening quickly. So the moment she unties the blindfold, to lifts it off, to seize the knife, to grabs the knife out the window, to brings it to her back, cuts the rope, and then boom, now she's freeing the rest. That all happens fast, fast, fast. So that is why you'd want to use these small panels, and a lot of them, it helps that pacing. The reader is moving through the story at a pace, as opposed to a big action and then another action and then another panel that could be 10 minutes later or something, and you've got to use more dialogue and narration to explain the differences in time and space. Here, we're just moving. Boom, boom, boom. They're not done. Again, so Xavier has communicated this plan telepathically to Jean. She's using her powers to help hold up all of the people from the carnival. The rest of the X-Men are going to try to stop the Blob. Cyclops just basically knocks him in a hole, like just blasts the floor out from underneath him so that he's got to crawl his way out. And then the rest of them are just humans. They've got some guns. That's easy for the X-Men to clear off. And again, we see Beast being able to sort of walk on the wall with his toes, which is something that kind of doesn't stick around with the character. So I did, well, we'll finish here with the story, and then I'll just mention my last notes here. I like this. So, again, the rest of the team finishes up the rest of the carnival folks, and Xavier now uses his machine, and he tells them all, like, you're not going to remember any of this. And they're all like, what is happening? And they're like, I don't know, let's go home. But I liked this cut from all the shocked faces of the people looking at us to now the smiling, with the exception of Cyclops, X-Men looking down on them. I thought that was a good transition. It's sort of that one view, and then you turn and you have the opposite view, and you see the X-Men sort of beaming at him, and then everything goes back to the Blob at the carnival doing his thing. I did say I thought once we got to kind of here. I said the drawing was a little sparse. So here's what I mean by that. Like this of his, Cyclops blasting out the ground. You do a sound effect. There's a little bit of we don't even draw the blast hitting the floor. There's just sort of a sound effect. The leg is just sort of a hatch. I mean, you could, if you wanted to break it down, you could kind of count the lines. There's really not much there. This face of the Blob looks nothing like the rest of the faces of the Blob. Like, let's see if we could, like, so we'll look at this face. So this is more round at the cheek, sort of scrunched up there, and just the whole shape of the face is different. It's almost more, it's heavy at the bottom and almost square, or I don't know what you call that shape. It's a little bit longer. Like it's just different. And so anytime this happens, this image of Angel and Beast, very small. So you're not using big lines. You got to go quick. But that's what it looks like. It looks quick. We're going to use a lot of black. We're just going to sort of shadow it out and give you a form. But when you're reaching that end of the book, it's very possible that you're either up against a deadline, whether that's the inker, whether that's the penciler, whether that's both, and it's very easy to kind of rush through. Before we saw like a lot of really interesting, colorful people. We've got a strong man, we've got a cowboy, we've got some guy in a marching band uniform with a gun. You've got acrobats, you've got all these people. They're all kind of unique characters. A clown. Well, now it's just dudes in like just brown clothes, and the Blob's face. Like, why isn't one of them the clown? Where's the strong man? We don't have time for that, right? So we're moving quickly through this, this deadline. That's my opinion. That's my guess. If I had to speculate on what I think happened, but that is the end of X-Men number 3. We're going to cut back over to the desk and we'll wrap everything up. So that is X-Men number 3. Super fun issue. Interesting start to the Blob, where we see the Blob for the first time, and he's introduced. Not super scary character, but at the time, a big threat, so that was a fun introduction. We've seen more development of the characters, which is really important. I like that a lot. Overall, I would give this probably a 5 out of 10. It's got action, which is fun, but in the end, it's just sort of, it's an introduction story still. Even though we're in issue 3, we're still learning about powers, we're learning about the relationships, we're still developing those characters. So I would give it a 5 out of 10, but overall fun, especially in the history. If you don't know how the X-Men first met the Blob, now you know. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you had a great time reviewing this comic with me. It was definitely fun to dip back into those early silver days of the X-Men and see some of that history. So thank you so much, and I'll see you here next week for more Extraordinary X-Men. Thanks.